You are looking at a stove. It weighs up to 1,500 kilograms, stands taller than most people, and has not been fired since morning, yet it is still radiating warmth 12 hours later. This is the Kachelofen, medieval Central Europe's answer to a brutal problem. Open hearths captured barely 10 to 20% of their fuel's energy, and they choked rooms with smoke. By the 13th century, craftsmen in the German-speaking lands had engineered a ceramic thermal battery reaching 70 to 90% efficiency, numbers that rival modern heating systems. The story of how they achieved that with nothing but clay, brick, and fire begins with just how miserable winter actually was. Winter in medieval Central Europe demanded constant vigilance. Open hearths, the centerpiece of every home, devoured wood at a relentless pace, yet offered little in return. At best, only 10 to 20% of the fire's energy ever made it into the room. The rest vanished up the chimney, carried away by hot smoke and gusting drafts. Even as flames danced in the grate, the cold pressed in from stone walls and drafty windows. Families huddled close, tending the fire from dawn until dusk, knowing that a moment's neglect meant the room would chill within the hour. The work never let up. Someone always had to feed the fire, break up logs, and sweep out ash. Wood piles shrank quickly, and for many households, the cost and labor of gathering fuel shaped the rhythm of daily life. In regions where forests were tightly regulated or far from home, the burden grew heavier. A typical open hearth could burn through 30 to 45 kilograms of wood each day just to keep a single room habitable. The rest of the house remained cold, and during the harshest months, survival meant rationing wood and layering on heavy garments. Smoke was a constant companion. Poorly vented chimneys let fumes drift into living spaces, stinging eyes and coating ceilings with soot. Respiratory illness was common, especially among children and the elderly. The open hearth was not just inefficient, it was hazardous. Yet for centuries, no better option existed. The struggle to stay warm shaped everything from family routines to the design of homes, setting the stage for a breakthrough that would change how people lived through winter. A single line in a 1249 inventory from a Swabian convent hints at the quiet beginnings of a new kind of heat. The record lists 20 Kachelofen für die Stube, 20 tiles for the parlor, alongside firewood and other daily necessities. For Professor Martina Schaefer, who has spent years tracing the earliest traces of the Kachelofen, this entry stands as the first documentary proof that tiled stoves had entered the world of written history. Unlike the open hearths that filled rooms with smoke and devoured wood, these early tiled stoves appeared in the carefully managed spaces of monastic life. Monks and nuns, often at the forefront of practical innovation, were among the first to experiment with ways to keep their living quarters warm without constant fire tending. Archaeological evidence supports the written record. Dr. Lars Jurgensen points to fragments of heat-resistant tiles and traces of mortar in monastic workshops and castle outbuildings across southern Germany and Austria. These finds, matched with the 1249 convent listing, suggest that the Kachelofen was not a sudden invention, but the product of gradual refinement, first in religious communities, then in the halls of the nobility. By the late 13th and early 14th centuries, inventories from towns like Nuremberg and Augsburg begin to mention Ofen and Kakel as distinct household assets, sometimes even specifying the number and size of tiles required for a proper installation. Martin Weiss, a master stove builder who has reconstructed several early examples, notes that guild charters from around 1295 already set standards for tile dimensions and assembly. These documents show a technology moving from isolated experiment to formal craft. The Kachelofen, once a curiosity in monastic ledgers, was on its way to becoming a defining feature of domestic life in Central Europe. A Kachelofen, in its earliest recognizable form, stood apart from the rough stone hearths that dominated medieval rooms. Imagine a tall rectangular column rising from the floor, its bulk built from hundreds of kilograms of dense brick and clay. The stove's core could weigh anywhere from 500 to 1,500 kilograms, sometimes even more in grander halls, giving it a presence that was both architectural and practical. Around this massive heart, craftsmen fitted a shell of ceramic tiles, each one carefully shaped and glazed. These tiles were more than decoration. Their glossy surface, fired at temperatures above 900 degrees Celsius, locked out moisture and protected the masonry from the constant cycles of heating and cooling. The colors ranged from deep greens and blues to earthy ochres, reflecting local traditions and the skill of the tile makers' guilds. The outer shell wasn't just for show. It created a sealed, almost AR-tight envelope, trapping the heat inside for hours and ensuring that warmth radiated gently into the room. The tiles themselves added to the stove's thermal mass, acting as a second layer of heat storage. Some early stoves featured simple geometric patterns while others boasted molded reliefs or even coats of arms, an unmistakable sign of status for those who could afford such artistry. Master stove builder Martin Weiss points out that the earliest guild regulations, dating to the late 13th century, already specified minimum core weights and tile counts for a proper Kachelofen. This was more than a matter of craft pride. It was a guarantee that the stove would hold and release enough heat to warm an entire living space through the coldest nights. The result was a device that looked solid, almost monumental, and whose smooth, glazed surface invited touch even hours after the fire had gone out. With its heavy masonry core and carefully fitted tile skin, the Kachelofen was both a feat of engineering and a work of art. Its anatomy set the stage for the internal labyrinth of flues and channels that would make it one of Europe's most enduring heating technologies. Inside the Kachelofen, heat did not simply rise and escape. Instead, it was trapped and tamed by a network of narrow channels hidden within the massive brick core. Dr. Lars Jorgensen, whose team has measured dozens of surviving stoves, describes these internal passages as a labyrinth, carefully engineered to force hot gases on a winding journey before they ever reach the chimney. Each channel typically measured between 8 and 12 centimeters wide, with a height as slim as 4 to 6 centimeters. The total length of these passages could stretch from 2.5 to 4 meters, folded back and forth within the stove's body. The path was never straight. Instead, it zigzagged around stepped baffles, internal walls that slowed the smoke, making it linger against the brick. As the hot gases traveled, their energy seeped into the dense masonry, charging the stove like a thermal battery. This was not an accidental feature. Medieval builders knew that every extra bend, every added meter of channel, meant more heat absorbed and less wasted. Dr. Jorgensen's measurements of a late 14th century stove in Moran show that after a fire burned for just 2 hours, the core's temperature could climb above 200 degrees Celsius. Yet the chimney exhaust would already have cooled to just 100 or 120 degrees Celsius by the time it left the house. The secret was time. The longer the gases stayed inside, the more thoroughly their heat was stripped away and stored. Guild records from Augsburg and Nuremberg, dating to the early 15th century, detail the minimum channel lengths and cross-sections required for a certified Kachelofen. These standards were not just bureaucratic, they reflected a growing understanding that efficiency depended on geometry. A well-built stove could warm a room all night on a fraction of the wood an open hearth consumed, and it did so by making every bit of heat work twice before letting it go. A Kachelofen could do what no open hearth ever managed. It turned a short, controlled fire into a day's worth of steady, reliable warmth. In workshops run by master stove builder Martin Weiss, tests on reconstructed medieval stoves reveal the numbers behind the reputation. With just 2 to 3 kilograms of dry wood, a bundle no bigger than a pair of thick branches, a properly built Kachelofen could heat a 20 square meter room for 12 to 24 hours. The secret lay in the stove's massive core, weighing over a ton in many homes, and the intricate network of flue channels inside. Fired for only 2 or 3 hours, the stove's brick and tile mass absorbed the energy of the burning wood, then released it slowly, radiating heat long after the flames had died down. Efficiency figures from both historical records and modern laboratory studies confirm the advantage. Where an open hearth wasted more than 80% of its energy, a Kachelofen captured and used between 70 and 90%. Exhaust gases left the chimney at just 100 to 150 degrees Celsius, proof that most of the heat had been stored, not lost. Thermographic imaging from Weiss's demonstration, stove shows a surface temperature of 200 degrees Celsius even 8 hours after the fire ended. The exterior stayed warm to the touch, spreading gentle heat into the room without the risk of burns or sudden drafts. Compared to a modern wood stove, which might deliver heat for only 2 to 4 hours and needs constant attention, the Kachelofen's thermal inertia transformed the rhythm of winter life. The numbers tell the story: a single firing, a fraction of the wood, and warmth that lasted until morning. In practical terms, this meant less time spent gathering fuel, fewer trips to the woodpile, and a home that stayed comfortable through the longest nights. The Kachelofen's efficiency was not just technical, it was a revolution in how people experienced the cold. Life around a Kachelofen felt different from the world of the open hearth. Instead of huddling close to a smoky fire or dashing to fetch more wood, families could finally relax. The stove's massive core, still radiating heat hours after the flames died, turned living rooms into true refuges from the cold. Built-in benches known as Ofenbänke lined the sides and base of many stoves. These seats, warmed by the stove's masonry, became prized spots on winter evenings, places where children read, elders rested aching joints, and neighbors gathered to share news. The heat was steady and gentle, never scorching, and the outer tiles stayed warm to the touch well into the next morning. Some Kachelofen included small baking niches or ovens built directly into the masonry. After the main fire had burned down, the lingering warmth inside these compartments was enough to bake bread, dry fruit, or even keep a stew simmering overnight. In wealthier homes, the stove's warmth extended into adjoining rooms through low arched openings, allowing bedrooms or studies to share in the comfort. Even in modest households, the Kachelofen often anchored the main living space, shaping how rooms were used and how families organized their days. The change was more than physical. With less time spent hauling wood and tending the fire, daily routines shifted. People could linger over meals, work on crafts, or simply rest without the constant background worry of a dying flame. The air was clearer, the walls stayed cleaner, and the risk of burns or stray sparks dropped. The Kachelofen transformed winter from a season of struggle into one of warmth and sociability, setting a new standard for comfort across Central Europe. By the late Middle Ages, the Kachelofen had become more than a curiosity in monasteries and noble halls. Production centers sprang up in cities like Nuremberg, Augsburg, and along the Upper Rhine, where tile makers and stove builders formed powerful guilds. These guilds enforced strict standards on tile size, often 12 by 12 centimeters, and required a minimum number of tiles for each stove, ensuring a reliable product that could be traded far beyond its place of origin. Nuremberg's tile makers, documented as early as 1295, set the benchmark for both quality and volume, supplying stoves and tiles to growing towns across Central Europe. Augsburg, with its access to rich clay deposits, became another key supplier, sending finished tiles along river routes and overland by cart. Trade networks extended even further. The Hanseatic League's merchant fleets carried standardized tiles from workshops in Lübeck and Rostock to the Baltic coast, linking northern markets with the ceramic traditions of the south. Merchant ledgers from the 14th century record shipments of tiles and stove parts to cities as far as Gdansk and Stockholm. In the Alps and Bohemia, raw clay from the Mühlviertel region fed bustling workshops that supplied both local castles and distant customers. Monastic communities like St. Gallen Abbey not only produced tiles for their own use, but also sold surplus stock to neighboring estates, spreading both the technology and the craft. As guild regulation tightened and trade routes matured, the Kachelofen moved steadily from the world of the elite into the homes of townspeople and eventually rural families. Standardized tiles and assembly methods made it possible for skilled craftsmen to build reliable stoves in even modest dwellings. What began as a luxury for monasteries and castles became a practical solution for villagers facing long, harsh winters, a transformation driven by the combined forces of craft, commerce, and necessity. High in the Alps, winters could last half the year, with snowdrifts piling against stone walls and temperatures dropping well below freezing. In these conditions, the Kachelofen became more than a household fixture. It was a lifeline. Typical stoves in mountain villages stood between 1.2 and 2 meters tall, their heavy brick and tile cores anchoring the main living room. The sheer mass of these stoves meant that after a single firing, warmth would seep slowly into the room for 12, sometimes even 24 hours. For families in Tyrol, Bohemia, and the Bavarian uplands, this endurance was not a luxury, but a necessity. Every log saved mattered. Where wood had to be hauled up steep slopes or rationed from communal forests, the Kachelofen's efficiency translated directly into fewer trips through deep snow and less time spent chopping fuel. A well-built stove could cut daily wood use to a quarter of what was needed for an open hearth, shrinking a back-breaking chore into a manageable routine. In regions where forest rights were tightly controlled, this difference could decide whether a family endured the winter with enough fuel to spare. The stove's height also played a role in how heat was distributed. Warm air gathered around the upper tiles, radiating down and out into the room. In many homes, benches built into the base provided a warm seat, while the body of the stove doubled as a drying rack for wet clothes and boots. The Kachelofen's presence shaped the rhythm of life. Children gathered on its benches after school, elders rested their bones, and neighbors shared stories long after the fire burned out. In the Alpine cold, the tiled stove was not just a piece of technology, it was the heart of survival and community. Coal, gas, and electric heating swept through Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries, pushing the Kachelofen to the margins. Central heating promised effortless warmth at the turn of a dial, and masonry stoves, heavy, slow to install, and expensive, seemed like relics of a vanished world. Yet the story did not end there. As energy prices climbed and concerns about fossil fuel use grew, builders and homeowners began to look again at the old tiled stove. In Alpine regions where winters are long and wood remains plentiful, modern versions of the Kachelofen have quietly returned. These new masonry heaters use the same principle as their medieval ancestors: a dense brick and tile core, a labyrinth of internal channels, and a brief, intense fire that stores heat for hours. Recent retrofit projects in Bavaria have measured the difference. When a traditional Kachelofen replaced a gas boiler in a well-insulated farmhouse, annual natural gas use dropped by 41%. The stove's high thermal efficiency, often between 70 and 90%, meant that a few kilograms of wood could keep the home warm for a full day, with minimal emissions and steady, radiant heat. Engineers found that the combination of stored warmth and careful draft control allowed families to maintain comfort while burning far less fuel. Today, master stove builders and energy consultants are working together to adapt these time-tested designs for modern homes, blending centuries-old craft with new materials and tighter building envelopes. The Kachelofen, once nearly obsolete, is again shaping how people think about comfort, efficiency, and the future of home heating. Today, homes worldwide still struggle with energy waste and uneven comfort, just as medieval families once did. The Kachelofen's massive thermal core and labyrinth of channels offered a solution centuries ahead of its time: steady warmth, less fuel, cleaner air. As modern heating faces calls for efficiency and sustainability, its legacy challenges us to rethink how we build for comfort and conservation. True innovation endures, even through stone and fire. Share your thoughts below.